Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that your calendar is completely full. There are messages waiting for answers, meetings you agreed to attend, tasks that were supposed to be finished yesterday, family responsibilities, financial obligations, unfinished projects, and people who need something from you. You begin moving. You answer quickly. You solve problems. You cross items off lists. By evening, you are exhausted. And then an uncomfortable question appears. If I am so busy moving forward, why am I not sure I'm going somewhere I actually want to go? This is the problem underneath Stephen R. Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The book is often remembered as a productivity classic. Its title encourages that interpretation. 7 Habits. Highly Effective People. It sounds as though we are about to receive a list of techniques for getting more done. But that is not really the center of Covey's argument. His deeper concern is character. What kind of person are you becoming while pursuing what you want? How do you respond when circumstances are outside your control? How do you decide what deserves your limited time? How do you cooperate with people whose interests differ from yours? How do you preserve trust? And how do you build a life that remains effective over years rather than merely looking productive this week? Covey's 7 habits are more interesting when we stop treating them as 7 independent instructions. They form a progression. The movement begins with personal responsibility. Then comes direction. Then priority. Only after that does the framework turn seriously toward relationships, cooperation, listening, and collective creativity. Finally, it asks how the entire system can be renewed so that effectiveness does not consume the person trying to become effective. In that sense, the book describes a movement from dependence toward independence and then from independence toward interdependence. First, learn to govern yourself, then learn to work meaningfully with others. That progression is the real architecture of the book. And it begins with one of the most difficult distinctions in personal development, the difference between what happens to us and what we do next. Suppose you are driving to an important meeting. Traffic stops completely. You look at the clock. You were supposed to arrive 15 minutes early. Now you may arrive 20 minutes late. You become angry. The driver ahead of you seems incompetent. The city should have planned the road better. Why did everyone choose this exact time to travel? None of these thoughts moves the traffic. The external fact is simple. The road is blocked. But around that fact, another layer is forming. Interpretation, emotion, response. Covey's first major principle is proactivity. The word is now so common in corporate language that it can sound almost empty. But Covey means something more fundamental than taking initiative. He is talking about responsibility for response. Between circumstance and action, human beings sometimes possess a space in which they can choose. Not complete control, not infinite freedom, a space. Traffic is outside your control. Whether you call the people waiting for you is not. You cannot change the accident ahead. You can decide whether you spend the next 30 minutes feeding your anger. You cannot instantly arrive at the meeting. You can decide what to do with the situation that now exists. This sounds simple, but it becomes much harder when the stakes rise. Imagine losing a job. The job loss may be caused by an economic downturn, restructuring, automation, a bad manager, your own mistakes, or some combination. You cannot make the event unhappen, but different responses remain possible. You can update your resume, contact people, reduce expenses, learn something, ask for feedback, rest briefly, become bitter, blame yourself for everything, blame everyone else for everything, avoid thinking about it. The circumstances constrain you. They do not necessarily determine every next action. This distinction is powerful because it relocates attention. Instead of asking only, what is happening to me, you also ask, what remains mine to do? But responsibility is easy to distort. Taken too far, proactivity can become a philosophy of blaming people for conditions they did not create. Someone struggling with poverty cannot simply choose a different economic environment. Someone experiencing discrimination cannot eliminate institutional barriers through attitude. A person caring for a severely ill family member has real constraints on time. An employee with little bargaining power cannot redesign an entire organization. Health, class, geography, family responsibilities, disability, political institutions, and luck all shape the range of available choices. So the useful version of Covey's principle is not everything is your responsibility. It is, do not surrender the responsibility that actually is yours. That distinction matters. There are circumstances you cannot control. There are circumstances you can influence. There are actions you directly control. Wisdom begins by distinguishing them. Imagine standing in heavy rain without an umbrella. You can curse the weather. You can pretend it is not raining. You can blame yourself for failing to control the sky. Or you can look for shelter. Responsibility is not the belief that you created the rain. It is the recognition that your next movement is still partly yours. This idea becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Because as if you have no meaningful responsibility for your response, then goals, priorities, cooperation, and character become almost irrelevant. The first habit is therefore less about productivity than agency. What part of this situation belongs to me? Covey describes this through the distinction between concerns and influence. Human beings can care about almost anything. The economy, politics, the behavior of relatives, the opinions of strangers, the decisions of executives, global events, the weather, the future. But our direct influence is much smaller. The psychological problem occurs when attention becomes dominated by concerns over which we have almost no immediate influence. Imagine spending 2 hours angrily reading arguments between strangers online. By the end, you feel informed, outraged, perhaps morally energized. But what changed? Maybe something did. Perhaps you learned useful information. Perhaps you contributed to a meaningful discussion. But often nothing changed except your emotional state. Meanwhile, an email you could have sent remains unsent. A conversation you could have had remains avoided. A skill you could have practiced remains undeveloped. A relationship you could have strengthened receives no attention. The issue is not that large public concerns are unimportant. Citizens should care about things beyond their immediate private lives. The issue is allocation of agency. If all attention flows toward what you cannot influence, helplessness grows. If attention includes what you can actually affect, capacity grows. This is still relevant in an age Covey did not live to see in its current form. Digital media gives us unprecedented awareness of events while giving us very limited power over most of them. We can know about thousands of crises. Our nervous systems were not necessarily designed to carry all of them simultaneously. The result can be a strange form of passive urgency. Everything feels important. Very little feels actionable. Covey's framework suggests a question. What is the next responsible action available to me? That question does not solve the world. It converts abstract concern into possible agency. But agency without direction can become extremely efficient wandering. You can become very good at taking action without knowing which actions deserve to be taken. This leads to the second movement in Covey's framework. Begin with the end in mind. Again, the phrase can sound like ordinary goal setting. Know what you want. Set a target. Work backward. But Covey's deeper argument concerns values and direction. What kind of life are your current decisions constructing? Imagine a ladder leaning against a wall. You climb. The first few steps are difficult. You become stronger. You develop techniques for climbing faster. You buy better equipment. You measure progress. You become excellent at ladders. After 20 years, you reach the top. Only then do you look around and realize the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. Efficiency cannot rescue misdirection. This is one of the most enduring ideas in the book. There is a difference between management and leadership in the broad personal sense. Management asks how to do things efficiently. Leadership asks which things should be done. You can optimize your schedule without examining your life. You can increase income without asking what the income is for. You can become more productive at work while becoming less present at home. You can pursue status because everyone around you appears to value it. You can win a competition you never consciously chose to enter. The danger is not failure. It is successful movement toward an unexamined destination. Imagine a young lawyer. At 25, she joins a prestigious firm. The salary is excellent. The work is demanding. Everyone around her is ambitious. The next objective is obvious: promotion, then partnership, then larger clients, then greater responsibility. She does well. 15 years pass. One evening, she realizes that she has spent most of her adult life pursuing goals generated by the institution around her. This does not mean the career was a mistake. Perhaps she genuinely values the work, but perhaps she never stopped long enough to ask, what am I actually optimizing? Covey's second principle creates that interruption. Imagine the future, not merely the next promotion, not merely the next quarter. What do you want your relationships to look like? What kind of parent, friend, colleague, partner, or citizen do you want to be? What kind of work deserves your time? Which values should remain intact even when violating them would be profitable? These are not productivity questions. They are questions of orientation. Covey famously encourages thinking from the perspective of the end of life. The point is not morbidity, it is distance. Immediate incentives are powerful. A deadline today can feel more important than a relationship maintained over 30 years. A salary increase can feel more concrete than integrity. A notification can feel more urgent than a long-term project. Imagining life from a distant perspective changes the scale. Suppose you are offered a promotion. It pays substantially more. It also requires constant travel. If your only objective is income, the answer may be easy. If one of your deepest priorities is being present while your children are young, the decision becomes more complicated. There is no universal correct answer. The promotion may still be right, but values make trade-offs visible. Without explicit priorities, the environment chooses for you. The loudest demand wins. The most urgent email wins. The person most willing to interrupt you wins. The institution with the strongest incentives wins. You remain active, but increasingly reactive. This is why Covey's second habit naturally leads to the third. Once you know what matters, you must organize behavior around it. This is where priorities become real. It is easy to say family matters. The calendar reveals whether family receives time. It is easy to say health matters. Daily behavior reveals whether health receives attention. It is easy to say learning matters. Your schedule reveals whether learning survives when life becomes busy. Values that never affect allocation are aspirations, not priorities. Covey distinguishes between urgency and importance. This may be the most practically enduring part of the entire framework. Urgent things demand attention now. Important things contribute to significant long-term outcomes. Sometimes they overlap. A medical emergency is urgent and important. A critical deadline may be urgent and important, but much of life is more ambiguous. Answering a non-essential notification is urgent in the sense that it demands immediate attention. It may not be important. Exercising is often important, but rarely urgent. Strengthening a relationship is important, but may not become urgent until the relationship is already damaged. Planning is important. Learning is important. Preventive health care is important. Long-term creative work is important. Rest can be important. None of these necessarily screams. This creates one of the great asymmetries of modern life. Urgency is loud. Importance is often quiet. Imagine two plants in your house. The first plant has an alarm attached to it. Every 15 minutes it makes a loud noise demanding water. The second plant never makes a sound. It simply grows or dies depending on whether you care for it. Which plant receives more attention? Probably the noisy one. Your life contains similar plants. Messages make sounds. Relationships often do not. Deadlines appear in red. Health can decline silently. Meetings arrive automatically on calendars. Reflection must usually be scheduled deliberately. Urgency contains its own reminder system. Importance often depends on character. This is why prioritization is not primarily a time management technique. It is a moral act. Every yes consumes part of a finite life. Suppose someone says, "I don't have time to exercise." Sometimes that is literally true in practical terms. Their life may contain overwhelming responsibilities, but often the statement means something more precise. Other things consistently receive priority over exercise. That phrasing is uncomfortable because it reveals choice. The same applies to relationships. I don't have time to call my parents. I don't have time to read. I don't have time to think. Sometimes the issue is not total absence of time. It is competition between values. Covey's framework asks us to make that competition visible. But here we encounter one of the assumptions behind traditional productivity literature. Not everyone has equal control over their time. An executive can decline a meeting more easily than a nurse can decline a shift. A freelancer may control location, but face unstable income. A parent working two jobs cannot simply redesign the week around ideal priorities. A warehouse worker may have almost no control over task sequence. A caregiver may have plans repeatedly interrupted by another person's needs. The language of first things first can become insensitive if it assumes everyone possesses the same autonomy. So the principle remains powerful, but its application must be contextual. Prioritization is not always about controlling the calendar. Sometimes it is about protecting tiny spaces inside a calendar largely controlled by others. A 20-minute walk, one uninterrupted meal, a weekly phone call, 10 minutes of reading, one boundary, one evening without work. Effectiveness cannot be measured by how closely someone's life resembles the schedule of a highly autonomous professional. The deeper principle is alignment. Given the freedom actually available, how closely do your actions reflect what you claim matters? That question applies across very different lives. Now, something important happens in Covey's architecture. The first three habits are largely about self-governance, responsibility, direction, priority. But a human being can become personally disciplined and still be terrible with other people. You can be proactive, goal-oriented, and highly organized while being manipulative, selfish, arrogant, or impossible to trust. Personal effectiveness reaches a limit. Life is relational. Most significant achievements involve cooperation. Families require it. Organizations require it. Communities require it. Friendships require it. Markets require it. Even individual accomplishments usually depend on teachers, colleagues, customers, infrastructure, institutions, and social trust. So Covey moves from independence to interdependence. This transition is philosophically important. Many self-development systems stop at independence, become stronger, more disciplined, more confident, more self-sufficient. But complete independence is largely an illusion. Maturity is not merely the ability to stand alone, it is the ability to cooperate without losing responsibility for yourself. This is where the idea of thinking win-win enters. The phrase has become corporate language, and that can make it sound naive. Surely not every situation allows everyone to win. That is true. Some negotiations are genuinely competitive. If two companies want one contract, only one may receive it. If two people want the same apartment, the landlord cannot rent the entire apartment to both. If resources are fixed, interests can conflict. So win-win should not be interpreted as a magical claim that every conflict contains an outcome where everyone receives everything they want. Its deeper value lies in how we frame relationships. Do we assume that another person's success automatically threatens ours? Do we approach negotiation as extraction? Can we search for arrangements in which legitimate interests on both sides are respected? Consider two co-workers arguing over who should lead an important project. Both want leadership. At first, the situation appears zero-sum. One leads, the other does not. But why do they want leadership? One wants visibility with senior management. The other wants experience managing a team. Those interests are not identical. Perhaps one can lead the client presentation while the other manages internal execution. The original positions conflict. The underlying interests may permit cooperation. This distinction between positions and interests is powerful. A child says, "I want to stay up until midnight." A parent says, "You're going to bed at 9." Positions collide, but underneath them are interests. The child wants autonomy and time to finish something enjoyable. The parent wants adequate sleep and a functional morning. Once the interests become visible, new arrangements may become possible. Perhaps bedtime shifts slightly. Perhaps weekend rules differ. Perhaps the activity continues tomorrow. Not every conflict resolves neatly, but understanding interests expands the solution space. Win-win thinking also depends on what Covey calls an abundance mentality. The idea is that some people experience life primarily through scarcity. If someone else receives praise, there is less praise for me. If someone else succeeds, my status falls. If someone else gets an opportunity, I have lost. Sometimes scarcity is real. Resources can be limited, but sometimes scarcity is psychological. Imagine two writers. One sees another writer's successful book and thinks their success proves readers still care about this kind of work. The other thinks their success took something that should have been mine. Same event, different mental model. The abundance perspective is useful when value can expand through cooperation. Knowledge is often like this. If I teach you something, I do not necessarily lose the knowledge. Trust can be like this. Creativity can be like this. Networks can be like this. But abundance language can also become unrealistic when used to ignore actual power differences. Imagine an employee negotiating salary with a huge corporation. Telling the employee to seek a beautiful win-win solution does not eliminate the organization's bargaining power. Or imagine a landlord and tenant during a housing shortage. Their interests may genuinely conflict. Cooperation is valuable. Power remains real. Covey's framework is strongest when win-win is treated as an ethical orientation toward mutual benefit, not as a denial of conflict. Sometimes a fair outcome requires saying no. Sometimes cooperation fails. Sometimes the other party is acting in bad faith. Sometimes protecting yourself is necessary. The goal is not universal agreement. It is avoiding unnecessary zero-sum thinking while remaining realistic about actual competition. This brings us to trust. Trust is one of the hidden currencies of effectiveness. Imagine working with someone you trust completely. They say a task will be completed Friday. You believe them. You do not send 5 reminders. You do not create backup plans. You do not inspect every detail. Communication is fast because words do not require constant verification. Now imagine working with someone you do not trust. Every promise creates uncertainty. Every message requires interpretation. Did they really mean that? Will they follow through? Should I document this? Do I need to protect myself? Low trust creates friction. This is true in organizations. It is also true in families and friendships. Trust reduces the cost of cooperation. Covey describes relationships through the metaphor of an emotional bank account. Helpful actions make deposits. Broken promises make withdrawals. The metaphor is imperfect but useful. Suppose you repeatedly tell a friend that you will call and repeatedly fail to do so. Each individual failure seems small. Eventually, the friend stops believing you. Then one day you genuinely intend to call. Your intention is sincere. But the relationship responds to history, not merely to your current sincerity. Trust compounds. So does distrust. This is why character matters more than technique. Imagine learning sophisticated communication strategies while remaining fundamentally dishonest. You can make eye contact, use someone's name, mirror their language, practice persuasive listening techniques. But if the other person senses that the entire interaction is a method for getting what you want, the technique eventually becomes manipulation. Covey's insistence on character is one reason the book remains interesting decades later. Techniques can improve behavior, but long-term relationships eventually reveal patterns. Are you reliable? Do you keep promises? Do you admit mistakes? Do you respect people when they have nothing to offer you? Do you tell different versions of the truth depending on the audience? Character becomes visible through repetition. This connects directly to the next major principle. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Few pieces of advice sound more obvious. Few are practiced less consistently. Imagine an argument between two partners. One says, "I feel like you're never really here anymore." The other immediately replies, "That's unfair. I'm working all these hours for us." Notice what happened. The first person expressed an experience. The second person heard an accusation. Defense began before understanding. Now the first person feels even less heard. So they intensify. You always do this. You never listen. The second person hears another attack. Defense intensifies. Within minutes, both people are arguing about statements neither originally intended to make. This is not primarily a logic problem. It is a listening problem. Human beings often listen autobiographically. While another person speaks, we compare their experience with ours. We prepare advice. We evaluate. We diagnose. We formulate a response. We wait for an opening. Real understanding requires temporarily suspending the need to center ourselves. That does not mean agreeing. This distinction is crucial. Understanding is not agreement. Suppose a coworker wants to cancel a project you strongly support. You listen carefully. You understand that they believe costs are rising, the market has changed, and the team is exhausted. You may still conclude they are wrong, but now your disagreement addresses their actual position rather than a simplified version. Understanding improves disagreement. This is especially relevant today because many public conversations reverse Covey's sequence. Be understood first. Speak, post, declare. Respond immediately. Interpret disagreement as hostility. Digital communication rewards speed more than comprehension. A statement appears. Within seconds, people react. Context is incomplete. Tone is inferred. Intent is guessed. The incentive is often to produce the sharpest response before understanding has time to form. Covey's principle introduces deliberate friction. What does this person actually mean? What evidence are they using? What are they afraid of losing? What value are they protecting? What would their position look like from inside their experience? Again, none of this requires surrendering judgment. Some ideas are wrong. Some behavior is harmful. Some arguments deserve rejection. But criticism becomes more accurate when understanding comes first. There is also an ethical dimension. To listen seriously is to acknowledge that another person's interior world is real. They are not merely an obstacle in your narrative. This can transform relationships. Imagine a teenager telling a parent, "I hate school." The parent immediately says, "You have no idea how lucky you are. When I was your age." The response may contain truth, but the conversation is probably over. Now imagine the parent saying, "What part of school feels worse right now?" A completely different door opens. Perhaps the problem is academic, perhaps social, perhaps the teenager is being bullied, perhaps they feel overwhelmed, perhaps they are bored, perhaps they simply had a terrible day. Listening gathers information before intervention. This is not merely kindness, it is effectiveness. Advice given before understanding is often advice for the wrong problem. Doctors know this. Engineers know this. Good managers know this. Good friends know this. Diagnosis should precede prescription. Yet listening has limits too. Empathy can become performative. People can learn phrases that sound understanding without actually being curious. "I hear you. Your feelings are valid. That makes sense." The words are not the point. The point is whether you are genuinely trying to see the situation from another perspective. Sometimes authentic understanding requires asking uncomfortable questions. Sometimes it requires silence. Sometimes it requires admitting that your first interpretation was wrong. And sometimes understanding another person reveals that cooperation is impossible. That possibility matters. Listening is not a guarantee of reconciliation. You may fully understand someone's values and conclude that they conflict fundamentally with yours. A healthy framework must leave room for boundaries. Covey's relationship principles work best when combined with discernment. Seek understanding, but do not confuse understanding with submission. Seek mutual benefit, but do not assume every relationship can produce it. Build trust, but do not offer unlimited trust to someone who repeatedly violates it. Interdependence requires both openness and boundaries. Once mutual respect and understanding exist, Covey moves towards synergy. This may be the most easily misunderstood habit because the word became a cliché. In ordinary corporate language, synergy often means little more than teamwork. Covey means something more ambitious. The combination can produce something that neither side could have produced independently. Imagine two architects designing a school. The first cares deeply about natural light and open communal spaces. The second worries about noise, distraction, and energy efficiency. At first, their priorities appear opposed. One wants openness, the other wants control. A weak compromise might make every room moderately open and moderately enclosed, satisfying nobody. Synergy asks a different question. Can the tension itself generate a better design? Perhaps classrooms receive movable acoustic partitions. Shared spaces use natural light strategically. Outdoor courtyards provide openness without disrupting classrooms. The final design does not split the difference. It uses both perspectives to create a third possibility. This is the ideal of synergy. Difference becomes productive rather than merely tolerable. That requires psychological security. If disagreement feels dangerous, people hide information. If every challenge threatens status, ideas become defensive. If the leader must always be right, the group loses access to everyone else's intelligence. The quality of collective thinking therefore depends partly on character. Humility becomes practical. If I assume my view is complete, other people can only agree or obstruct. If I assume my view is partial, disagreement may contain information. This is one of the most powerful transitions in Covey's framework. Personal confidence matures into relational humility. You begin with agency. I can choose my response. Then direction. I need principles. Then discipline. I must organize my behavior. But eventually you encounter a fact no amount of personal discipline can remove. You do not know everything. Other people see things you do not. Interdependence requires accepting partial knowledge. Imagine four people standing around a large sculpture. One sees a smooth surface, another sees a deep opening, another sees a staircase, another sees a sharp edge. They begin arguing about what the sculpture is really like. Each is accurately describing a partial view. The mistake is assuming partial accuracy equals total knowledge. Many disagreements work this way. A marketing team sees customers, engineers see technical constraints, finance sees cost, customer support sees recurring complaints, leadership sees strategy. Each group can become frustrated with the others. Why can't they understand what is obvious? Because what is obvious depends partly on where you stand. Synergy becomes possible when perspectives are combined without pretending all perspectives are equally correct. That last qualification matters. Different viewpoints do not automatically deserve equal weight. If one engineer has measured the bridge and another person simply feels the bridge is safe, these are not equivalent forms of evidence. Diversity of perspective is valuable when it adds relevant information, experience, or interpretation. It is not a substitute for expertise. Covey's relational framework can become sentimental if cooperation is treated as more important than truth. The goal is not agreement for its own sake. The goal is better understanding and better outcomes through intelligent cooperation. Sometimes one person's proposal really is better. Sometimes consensus produces mediocrity. Sometimes decisive leadership is necessary. The challenge is knowing when collaboration adds value and when it merely adds delay. This is especially relevant in modern organizations. Knowledge work often requires cooperation across specialties. A product may involve engineering, design, psychology, law, marketing, data, operations, and customer support. No single person fully understands the entire system. Covey's emphasis on interdependence may therefore be even more relevant today than when the book was written. But the modern workplace also exposes limitations in the framework. The 7 Habits often assumes that individuals possess meaningful autonomy and that organizations are sufficiently healthy for character-based cooperation to work. That is not always true. Imagine an employee in an organization where incentives reward internal competition. Promotions are scarce. Information is power. Managers punish dissent. Performance metrics encourage short-term results. Now tell everyone to think win-win. The advice collides with the system. Individuals can behave generously, but organizational incentives may punish them for doing so. This is a crucial limitation of character-centered thinking. Character matters. Systems matter too. A good person inside a badly designed system may be pressured toward bad behavior. Suppose sales employees receive bonuses based entirely on monthly revenue. Leadership also tells them to build long-term customer trust. What happens when honesty threatens the monthly target? The compensation system may speak louder than the value statement. Or imagine a company that praises work-life balance while promoting only employees who answer messages at midnight. The culture has already defined the real priority. Individual habits cannot fully repair institutional contradictions. This does not make Covey's principles irrelevant. It means they need a systems perspective. Personal responsibility should include recognizing when the environment itself needs to change. Sometimes effectiveness means adapting yourself. Sometimes it means redesigning the process. Sometimes it means challenging leadership. Sometimes it means leaving. Character should not become an excuse for institutions to transfer every structural problem onto individuals. This criticism applies particularly to the idea of proactivity. Organizations sometimes tell employees to take ownership when the employees lack authority, resources, or information. Responsibility without power becomes a trap. If you are accountable for an outcome, you need some capacity to influence the conditions producing it. Otherwise, proactivity becomes rhetoric. A mature version of Covey's framework therefore asks 2 questions. What is mine to improve, and what conditions must change for improvement to be possible? These questions protect responsibility from becoming blame. There is another assumption worth examining: the meaning of effectiveness itself. Effective at what? A person can become extraordinarily effective at earning money. Is that enough? Effective at gaining status? Effective at managing employees? effective at raising children, effective at protecting health, effective at maintaining friendship. Different domains contain different standards. Covey attempts to solve this by grounding effectiveness in principles and character rather than mere output. That is one of the book's strengths. But his worldview still reflects a particular tradition of American professional and managerial culture. There is a strong emphasis on intentionality, self-direction, productivity, leadership, planning, and achievement. These values can be useful. They are not culturally neutral. Some cultures place greater emphasis on communal obligation, tradition, contemplation, harmony, or acceptance. Some people do not want their lives organized around the concept of effectiveness at all. That is a legitimate challenge. Should a friendship be effective? Should a Sunday afternoon be effective? Should grief? Should play? Should watching rain from a window? The language of effectiveness can become invasive if applied to every human experience. Not everything valuable needs to produce an outcome. This is where the final habit becomes important. Covey calls it sharpening the saw. The metaphor concerns renewal. Imagine someone trying to cut down a tree with a saw. They work continuously, hour after hour. The blade becomes dull. Progress slows. Someone suggests stopping to sharpen it. The worker refuses. I don't have time. I'm too busy cutting. The absurdity is obvious. Yet people do versions of this constantly. Work becomes overwhelming, so sleep is reduced. Reduced sleep lowers concentration. Lower concentration makes work slower. Slower work creates more pressure. Pressure reduces sleep further. The person responds to declining capacity by demanding more output from declining capacity. Eventually, exhaustion is treated as evidence that greater effort is needed. Renewal interrupts this cycle. Rest, exercise, learning, reflection, relationships, activities that restore physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual capacity. The exact categories matter less than the principle. A system that consumes its own productive capacity is not effective over the long term. This is obvious in machines. It is strangely difficult for humans. Imagine owning a car and refusing all maintenance because maintenance costs time and money. Never change the oil. Never replace tires. Never inspect the brakes. For a while, you save resources. Then the car fails. Nobody calls this efficiency. But people routinely treat their bodies and relationships this way. Sleep becomes negotiable. Exercise is postponed. Friendships receive whatever time remains. Reflection disappears. Vacations become work performed from a different location. The system keeps running until it cannot. Covey's emphasis on renewal is therefore not a decorative final habit. It completes the model. Long-term effectiveness requires preserving the source of effectiveness. This also applies to skills. Imagine a surgeon who becomes highly competent and then stops learning. For years, experience compensates. Eventually, methods change. Technology changes. Evidence changes. Expertise can decay if it never renews itself. The same is true in almost every profession. A programmer who mastered one generation of technology cannot assume the environment will remain stable. A manager who succeeded with one kind of team may fail with another. A teacher may need new approaches for changing students and tools. Learning is maintenance, but renewal should not be reduced to professional development. A person is not merely an economic instrument requiring maintenance so they can return to work and produce more. This is an important modern correction. Rest is not valuable only because it improves productivity. Exercise is not valuable only because it improves executive function. Friendship is not valuable only because social support makes employees more resilient. A walk does not need to justify itself through better performance tomorrow. Some activities are intrinsically valuable. If renewal is framed entirely as sharpening yourself for more work, the metaphor becomes part of the problem. The deeper objective is a sustainable human life. This raises the question of balance. Covey's framework can sound as though all major areas of life should be continuously optimized: physical, mental, emotional, relational, spiritual, professional. But balance does not mean equal attention every day. Life has seasons. A medical resident may temporarily devote extraordinary time to training. A new parent may sleep poorly despite excellent intentions. An entrepreneur launching a company may work unusually long hours. Someone caring for a dying parent may have little capacity for personal projects. The question is not whether every week is balanced. The question is whether imbalance has become permanent without being consciously chosen. Temporary sacrifice can serve long-term values. Chronic neglect eventually becomes a value in practice, whether or not we intended it. This connects back to priorities. Suppose someone says family is their highest priority. For 10 years, work consistently receives nearly all their best energy. The person explains that the sacrifice is temporary, but temporary has lasted a decade. At some point, intention must confront evidence. This is one of the uncomfortable strengths of Covey's philosophy. Values should become visible in patterns, not perfect patterns, not rigid schedules, patterns. Character is what repeated choices gradually reveal. This is why the 7 habits should not be treated as a checklist. You do not complete proactivity and move on. You do not finish listening. You do not graduate from priorities. The habits interact. Imagine a manager facing a conflict with an employee. Proactivity asks the manager to take responsibility for their response rather than reacting defensively. Beginning with the end in mind asks what kind of relationship and outcome they actually want. Putting first things first means making time for the difficult conversation rather than postponing it. Win-win thinking asks whether both organizational needs and the employee's legitimate interests can be respected. Seeking first to understand requires listening before judging. Synergy asks whether the disagreement contains information that could improve the solution. Renewal asks whether both people have the capacity to continue functioning sustainably afterward. The habits become one process. Responsibility creates agency. Direction tells agency where to go. Priority converts direction into behavior. Mutual benefit expands behavior beyond self-interest. Understanding makes cooperation intelligent. Synergy turns difference into possibility. Renewal allows the process to continue. Seen this way, the framework is less about 7 habits than about a theory of maturity. The immature response says, "My circumstances determine me." The first movement says, "I have some responsibility for my response." Then my choices need direction. Then my priorities need to reflect that direction. Then maturity encounters other people. I cannot build everything alone. Other people have legitimate interests. Their perspectives contain information. Cooperation can create outcomes unavailable to isolated individuals. And finally, I am finite. My body, attention, relationships, and capacities require renewal. That is a much richer structure than a productivity checklist. But does it actually work? Some parts are difficult to test scientifically because Covey's habits are broad principles rather than narrowly defined psychological interventions. Be proactive is not a single measurable behavior. Think win-win can mean many things. Begin with the end in mind, blends values, clarification, planning, and identity. We should therefore be cautious about treating the 7 habits as if they were experimentally proven laws of human effectiveness. They are better understood as a philosophical and practical framework. Their value depends partly on whether they organize experience usefully. Many of the underlying ideas have strong support from broader research and experience. Planning matters. Goal clarity can improve behavior when goals are appropriate. Prioritization matters. Habits and environments influence action. Trust affects cooperation. Listening improves communication. Rest and recovery matter. Long-term relationships depend on repeated patterns of reliability. But the exact 7-part structure is Covey's synthesis, not a discovered law of nature. That distinction allows us to use the framework without turning it into doctrine. Take proactivity, powerful principle, but insufficient under structural constraint. Take long-term vision, useful, but the future is uncertain, and excessive planning can become rigidity. Take prioritization, essential, but people differ dramatically in control over their schedules. Take win-win, excellent when interests can align, naive when power is unequal or interests genuinely conflict. Take empathic listening, almost universally valuable, but understanding does not require tolerating harmful behavior. Take synergy, powerful in complex collaboration. But not every disagreement produces a brilliant third alternative. Sometimes compromise is the best available outcome. Sometimes one side is simply wrong. Take renewal, essential for sustainability. But renewal should not be valued only because it increases future productivity. The framework becomes stronger when its limits are visible. This is especially true because the world of work has changed dramatically since the book first appeared. Many people now work remotely or across time zones. Digital communication makes availability almost continuous. Careers are less linear. Organizations restructure rapidly. Gig work blurs the boundary between independence and insecurity. Artificial intelligence and automation change tasks faster than traditional career planning anticipated. Attention has become a commercial resource aggressively competed for by digital platforms. In this environment, put first things first acquires a new meaning. The challenge is no longer merely deciding what to do. It is protecting attention from systems specifically designed to capture it. Imagine sitting down to spend 45 minutes on something important. A message arrives, then another, a news alert, an email, a calendar notification, a recommendation, a social update. None is individually overwhelming. Together, they fracture attention. You spend the hour responding. You were busy. The important work remains untouched. Covey's distinction between urgency and importance becomes almost prophetic here. Modern technology can manufacture urgency at enormous scale. Every application wants to be important enough to interrupt you, but your nervous system cannot distinguish perfectly between what is important to you and what someone else has designed to feel urgent. Personal effectiveness increasingly requires environmental boundaries. Notifications off, devices outside certain rooms, blocks of uninterrupted time. Communication expectations negotiated explicitly. Not because technology is inherently harmful, because attention is finite. What receives attention receives pieces of life. That makes attention a moral resource. If you say your children matter, but your phone interrupts every conversation with them, the problem is not merely technological. It is a conflict between stated and enacted priorities. If you say creative work matters, but every morning begins with 2 hours of reactive communication, the environment may be selecting your priorities before you consciously do. Putting first things first today, therefore, involves designing attention. But again, control differs. A surgeon cannot silence urgent hospital communication. A customer support worker may be paid to respond quickly. A parent cannot schedule children-like tasks. Context determines what boundaries are possible. The principle is alignment, not imitation. This brings us back to character. Covey contrasts what he sees as character-based development with approaches focused primarily on personality, image, persuasion, or social technique. The distinction can be overstated. Social skills matter. Presentation matters. Communication techniques can genuinely improve relationships. But Covey's concern remains important. What happens when technique outruns character? Imagine someone who has learned excellent networking. They remember names, send thoughtful messages, offer compliments, maintain relationships strategically. But every relationship is evaluated according to usefulness. Can this person help me? Do they increase my status? Are they worth my time? The techniques are socially sophisticated. The underlying orientation is transactional. Eventually, people may sense it. Now imagine someone less polished but consistently trustworthy. They admit what they do not know. They keep promises. They give credit. They do not disappear when helping becomes inconvenient. Over time, which person would you trust with something important? Character is slow information. Charm appears quickly. Character requires observation. This creates another conflict with modern culture. Digital environments reward rapid impressions. A profile, a photograph, a short video, a confident statement, a personal brand. Character develops slowly and is difficult to display. It is revealed through behavior across situations, especially when incentives change. Anyone can appear generous when generosity is rewarded. What happens when generosity is costly? Anyone can praise honesty. What happens when honesty threatens status? Anyone can claim loyalty. What happens when a more attractive opportunity appears? Character becomes visible at the point where values become expensive. This is why integrity matters so much to long-term effectiveness. Imagine a business owner who discovers a mistake that benefits the company financially but harms a customer. Nobody else knows. Fixing it will cost money. The decision reveals more than a mission statement ever could. Character exists in the gap between declared principles and inconvenient choices. But character itself should not become rigid. A person can become so committed to consistency that they refuse to change their mind. I always finish what I start. That sounds admirable, until the project becomes clearly pointless. I never quit. Admirable, until persistence becomes self-destruction. I always put family first. meaningful, until family obligation becomes a justification for controlling behavior. Principles require interpretation. Long-term effectiveness depends not merely on firmness, but on judgment. This is where Covey's framework can benefit from a more modern understanding of adaptability. Beginning with the end in mind does not mean predicting the future perfectly. It means having enough direction to make coherent choices while remaining willing to update the route. Think of navigation. You choose a destination. Your map suggests a route. Then a road closes. A rigid person insists on following the original route because it was the plan. A directionless person drives wherever the road happens to lead. A flexible person preserves the destination while adapting the path. Values can function like destinations. Strategies are routes. Confusing them creates problems. You can change careers without abandoning the value of contribution. You can change routines without abandoning health. You can revise a business model without abandoning the problem you want to solve. You can change your mind without abandoning integrity. This distinction between principles and methods is central to sustainable effectiveness. Methods expire faster than principles. A particular productivity system may become obsolete. The need to prioritize does not. A communication platform changes. The need to understand other people remains. A career disappears. The need for purpose remains. Technology changes the environment. Responsibility remains. This may explain why much of Covey's framework continues to resonate despite its age. Its strongest ideas operate at a level deeper than specific techniques. Take responsibility where responsibility is possible. Know what you value. Protect important things from urgent distractions. Seek arrangements that respect legitimate interests. Listen before diagnosing. Use differences intelligently. Maintain the capacities on which everything else depends. These principles are difficult to make obsolete. The details around them can and should change. There is also a deeper philosophical tension running through the book. Can effectiveness and goodness be separated? Imagine a criminal organization run with extraordinary efficiency, clear goals, excellent communication, strong teamwork, precise priorities, constant learning. Is it effective? Operationally, perhaps. But Covey's character orientation implies that true effectiveness cannot be measured only by achieving desired outcomes. Means matter. Relationships matter. Long-term consequences matter. Principles matter. This is a stronger conception of effectiveness than simple success. A person who becomes wealthy by destroying trust may have succeeded financially while becoming ineffective relationally. A company that maximizes quarterly profits by exhausting employees may appear successful while damaging future capacity. A parent who controls a child through fear may achieve immediate obedience while weakening long-term trust. Short-term results can conceal long-term costs. This is why Covey's framework repeatedly pushes us toward time horizon. What happens next? And after that? And after that? Imagine a manager who solves every problem personally. At first, performance improves. Employees bring difficult decisions to the manager. The manager answers quickly. Problems disappear. The manager feels indispensable. Years later, the team cannot function independently. The short-term solution created long-term dependence. Effectiveness requires considering second-order consequences. The same is true personally. Working late tonight may solve a problem. Working late every night creates another problem. Skipping exercise this week may be necessary. Skipping it for 10 years has different consequences. Avoiding one difficult conversation preserves peace tonight. Avoiding every difficult conversation can destroy intimacy. Many ineffective patterns survive because they work temporarily. That is a profound idea. Procrastination reduces anxiety now. Overworking earns praise now. Avoiding conflict preserves comfort now. Spending creates pleasure now. Micromanaging creates control now. The immediate benefit hides the delayed cost. Long-term effectiveness means evaluating behavior across a wider time horizon. This is where character and patience meet. You may need to accept short-term discomfort for long-term integrity. Have the conversation. Set the boundary. Decline the opportunity. Rest. Delegate. Admit the mistake. Say no. Listen longer. None of these necessarily feels efficient in the moment. But effectiveness over decades is different from efficiency over hours. Perhaps that distinction is the heart of the entire book. Efficiency asks, how quickly can I climb? Effectiveness asks, is this the right wall? Efficiency asks, how many tasks did I complete? Effectiveness asks, did the important work receive attention? Efficiency asks, how do I win this argument? Effectiveness asks, what happens to the relationship after I win? Efficiency asks, how much can I produce? Effectiveness asks, can I continue producing without destroying the capacities that make production possible? Efficiency asks, how can I get this person to agree? Effectiveness asks, have I understood what they are actually saying? Efficiency compresses time. Effectiveness expands perspective. And once perspective expands, success becomes harder to define. Perhaps a successful career that destroys health is not entirely successful. Perhaps a productive week that neglects everything important is not entirely productive. Perhaps winning a negotiation that destroys trust is not entirely a victory. Perhaps independence that makes cooperation impossible is not maturity. Perhaps endless self-improvement that makes a person permanently dissatisfied with themselves is not improvement. These are uncomfortable possibilities because they resist simple measurement. Money can be counted. Tasks can be counted. Promotions can be counted. Followers can be counted. Trust is harder. Character is harder. Presence is harder. A meaningful conversation does not appear on a dashboard. Neither does keeping a promise when breaking it would have been convenient. Yet these invisible things often determine the quality of a life. Imagine reaching the end of a year. You completed hundreds of tasks. You attended dozens of meetings. You answered thousands of messages. What remains? Some of the work mattered. Much of it disappeared. Now consider a conversation in which you helped someone make a difficult decision, a promise you kept, a skill you developed, a relationship you repaired, a boundary you established, a project you continued when nobody was applauding. These may occupy little space on the calendar. Their consequences may last longer. This is why priorities cannot be derived from urgency alone. Urgency measures time pressure. Importance measures consequence and value. The two sometimes meet. Often they do not. Covey's great challenge is to build a life where important things receive attention before they become emergencies. Health before crisis. Relationships before rupture. Learning before obsolescence. Financial planning before desperation. Rest before collapse. Reflection before regret. This is preventive effectiveness, and prevention is psychologically difficult because successful prevention is invisible. If you maintain a relationship well, there may be no dramatic repair story. If you maintain health, there may be no crisis. If you communicate clearly, there may be no conflict. If you save money, an emergency may be absorbed quietly. Nothing happened. That nothing may be the result. Human beings celebrate rescue more easily than maintenance. The firefighter is visible. The building code is not. The emergency surgery is dramatic. The years of prevention are not. The repaired relationship produces a story. The relationship that never broke because both people consistently listened does not. Long-term effectiveness often consists of problems that never became problems. This is one reason it can feel unrewarding. You are investing in invisible futures. Character works similarly. A person builds trust slowly. For years, nothing dramatic happens. Then a crisis arrives. People believe them, support them, give them responsibility. The visible event is the crisis. The invisible cause is years of reliability. Trust compounds. So does skill. So does health. So do relationships. So does reputation. Long-term effectiveness is largely about protecting compounding processes. That perspective also clarifies renewal. Rest today may preserve judgment tomorrow. Learning this year may create adaptability 5 years from now. Time with a child today may shape a relationship decades later. No single action guarantees anything. Patterns change probabilities. And this is perhaps a more realistic interpretation of Covey than the language of guaranteed success. The habits do not guarantee success. You can be proactive and still fail. You can prioritize carefully and still encounter catastrophe. You can listen deeply and still lose a relationship. You can seek mutual benefit and meet someone determined to exploit you. You can maintain your health and still become ill. You can live by principles and still experience terrible luck. Character is not a contract with reality. It does not guarantee reward. Its value is different. Character increases coherence between what you believe and how you live. It can improve relationships. It can improve decision-making. It can make cooperation more sustainable. It can reduce certain self-created problems. But it cannot control the world. This is important because self-development literature can accidentally imply that successful people deserve success because they followed the correct principles. Reality is less fair. Luck matters. Opportunity matters. Institutions matter. Timing matters. Power matters. Health matters. Social support matters. The 7 habits should therefore be understood as tools for navigating agency, not explanations for every outcome. This makes the first habit even more important. Responsibility should be precise. Not everything is your fault. Not everything is your choice. But something usually remains available for response. And perhaps maturity consists partly in finding that something without pretending it is everything. Then choosing direction. Not because the future can be controlled. Because without direction, every external demand becomes a candidate for your life. Then choosing priorities. Not because schedules can be perfected, because attention is finite. Then learning cooperation. Not because everyone will agree, because other people are not merely obstacles. Then learning to listen, not because understanding guarantees harmony, because acting on misunderstanding is expensive. Then using differences, not because every conflict produces synergy, because partial perspectives can sometimes combine into better solutions. Then renewing capacity. Not because human beings are productivity machines, because finite beings cannot continuously spend resources without replenishment. This progression begins to look less like a formula for high achievement and more like a philosophy of responsible participation in life. You are responsible, but not omnipotent. You need direction, but cannot predict everything. You need priorities, but circumstances impose constraints. You need independence, but cannot flourish alone. You need cooperation, but not every conflict disappears. You need principles, but principles require judgment. You need discipline, but also renewal. The tensions are not defects in the framework. They are reality. Return to the person whose calendar was completely full. Messages answered, meetings attended, problems solved, tasks completed. The original question remains, if I am moving this quickly, where am I going? Covey's answer is not to move faster. It is to examine the direction before optimizing the speed. Take responsibility for the part of the journey that belongs to you. Decide what destination deserves your effort. Allow that decision to shape what receives your time. Remember that the road contains other people whose interests and perspectives are real. Listen to them. Build trust. Cooperate where cooperation creates something better. Protect yourself where it does not, and maintain the person who must continue making these decisions for years. The point is not to perform 7 habits perfectly. Perfection would contradict the idea of renewal. The point is alignment between values and actions, between short-term choices and long-term consequences, between independence and cooperation, between ambition and sustainability, between speaking and listening, between getting results and preserving the relationships through which many results become possible. And perhaps the deepest measure of effectiveness appears only after the usual measures have been removed. Imagine that nobody can see your resume. Nobody knows your income. Your job title disappears. Your productivity statistics disappear. Your awards disappear. Your follower count disappears. All the external scoreboards go dark. What remains? How do you respond when things go wrong? Can people trust your word? Do the people closest to you feel heard? Can you distinguish what matters from what merely demands attention? Can you cooperate without needing to dominate? Can you change your mind without losing your identity? Can you pursue ambition without allowing ambition to consume every other value? Can you rest without believing your worth has disappeared? Those questions move us far beyond productivity. They move toward character. And character in Covey's framework is not something you announce. It is something your repeated choices gradually reveal. The calendar matters because time is finite. Goals matter because direction matters. Relationships matter because almost no meaningful life is lived entirely alone. Principles matter because circumstances change. Renewal matters because you are not an infinite resource. The 7 habits become powerful when they stop being 7 things to remember and become one continuous question. Given what I can influence, what is the most responsible way to live? What I claim matters, while respecting the reality of other people and preserving the capacity to continue. There will never be one permanent answer. Life changes, responsibilities change, People change. The world changes. What matters at 30 may not be what matters at 60. The work that once deserved everything may eventually deserve less. A relationship may require more. A body may impose limits that ambition once ignored. A new responsibility may rearrange the entire hierarchy. Long-term effectiveness, therefore, cannot mean perfect consistency of behavior. It means consistency at the level of principles combined with flexibility at the level of methods. The route changes. The compass remains. And perhaps that is the most durable idea inside the 7 habits of highly effective people. The real danger is not that we will fail to become efficient enough. Human beings are becoming extraordinarily good at efficiency. Our tools become faster. Communication becomes faster. Information arrives faster. Artificial intelligence accelerates work. Automation removes friction. Calendars optimize schedules. Algorithms optimize attention. Everything pushes towards speed. The harder question is whether speed serves direction. A faster vehicle does not help if nobody has decided where it should go. A perfectly organized calendar can still contain the wrong life. An efficient organization can efficiently pursue a destructive objective. A persuasive person can become more effective at manipulation. Productivity amplifies direction. It does not choose direction. Character chooses. Values choose. Responsibility chooses. And those choices are rarely made once. They are made repeatedly, often quietly, in ones that do not look important enough to define a life. The email you decide not to send in anger. The promise you keep. The interruption you refuse because something more important deserves attention. The person you listen to even when you think you already understand. The opportunity you decline because its cost would violate a deeper priority. The disagreement in which you become curious instead of defensive. The evening when you stop working because tomorrow also deserves a functioning version of you. None of these moments looks historic. Together, they create a pattern. The pattern becomes character. Character shapes relationships. Relationships expand or restrict what becomes possible. And over enough time, those possibilities become a life. The final question is therefore not whether you can fit 7 habits into your routine. It is whether the way you repeatedly respond, choose, prioritize, listen, cooperate, and renew is building the kind of person who can be trusted with the life you are trying to create.